There is a manila folder in my kitchen. It's one of those plain ones, no label, no color tab, just the kind you get in a 12-pack from CVS for $4. I kept it in the second drawer, the shallow one by the stove that everyone has and nobody cleans out, the one with the dead batteries and the takeout menus you never throw away because you might need them. My husband had mentioned putting it there weeks before, in the way you mention things when you already know the answer and you're not really looking for a conversation. He said Connie had dropped off some papers from the school. I said okay. I didn't open the drawer. I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift rotation and the kids needed dinner and I thought, I'll look at it later. I didn't look at it until a Tuesday in October, standing in my kitchen in scrubs, still smelling like the hospital, still carrying the particular exhaustion of a shift where nothing went wrong but nothing was ever fully calm either. My kids were upstairs doing homework they hadn't started. My husband was somewhere over Indiana. I opened that drawer because I was looking for a pen, and I saw the folder and I thought, I have 30 seconds and nobody needs anything from me right now. I pulled it out and I stood there under the fluorescent light, and I read every single page. And I want you to understand what I'm about to tell you, because it sounds like a lot of small things before it sounds like one very large thing. The small things are the whole story. The large thing is just what happens when you finally add them up. My name is Stephanie. I'm 38 years old. I've been a labor and delivery nurse for 11 years at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. If you've had a baby in this city in the last decade, there is a non-trivial chance I was the person holding your leg. I have watched people at the exact moment a life begins, which means I've also been present for the full spectrum of what people are capable of when something they love is on the line. Protective and irrational and quietly ferocious, all at once, sometimes all three in the same breath. I thought I understood that combination well. I thought I could recognize it. It turns out, I could only recognize it when it was obvious. Brian and I have been married for 12 years. He is a good man, I want to say that up front, and I want it to land not as a disclaimer but as a fact, because what I'm about to describe is not a story about a bad man. It's a story about a distracted one, an optimistic one. A man who grew up watching his mother solve problems so efficiently and so quietly that he learned somewhere along the way that problems didn't actually require his attention, that by the time he noticed them, she'd already handled them, and the world had continued on, and there was no particular reason to develop a different reflex. Brian manages operations for a logistics company, and he is genuinely excellent at that job, and he travels Monday through Thursday, every week, without exception. When we had kids, Cadden, who is 9 now, and Mara, who is 7, we built our life around that schedule. We knew what we were signing up for. We talked about it before we got pregnant, while I was pregnant, and after we made a plan and we committed to the plan, and for a long time it worked. What made it work was Connie. Connie is Brian's mother. She's 64, retired from a long career in insurance adjusting, which, I want you to keep in mind, is a job that is entirely about knowing how documents work. She is sharp and energetic, and has never once seemed like a woman who is sitting around waiting to be needed. She lives 12 minutes from our house. She has been, since Cadden was 3 years old, the structural support beam of our family. She picks the kids up from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays when I'm on shift. She has a key to the house, has had one since we moved in, which felt practical at the time and felt, for a long time afterward, like a reasonable extension of the relationship. She fills the refrigerator when she comes over, and I stopped asking her not to because the math is simple. Either I accept that the refrigerator will have food in it, or I accept that sometimes there won't be food in it, and I don't have enough hours in a week to solve both problems. When Mara got strep 3 weeks after I'd gone back from maternity leave and Brian was in Charlotte and I was on a double, Connie was there within 20 minutes. She didn't call to ask if she should come. She just came. I want to be precise about this because it matters to the rest of the story. I was grateful for her. From the beginning, genuinely, without pretending. I am still grateful for the years of school pickups and sick days and last-minute dinners. None of that is a lie. But there is a specific flavor of gratitude that doesn't sit easily in your body. The kind where you feel slightly in debt, slightly watched, slightly aware that someone keeps doing things before you've had a chance to identify the need. which means you're always behind in a way you can never quite catch up to. That was the kind of grateful I felt around Connie. The kind that makes you wonder, in the quiet of your car on the way home from a long shift, whether grateful and indebted are actually two different words, or whether at some point they become the same one. Connie has a phrase. She uses it the way other people use hello, reflexively, preemptively, like the most natural thing in the world. The phrase is, I already took care of it. Variations include I already called them and I already talked to somebody and it's handled. She doesn't say these things with any particular emphasis. They arrive in conversation the way weather arrives, as simple fact, as background condition. I already took care of the dentist scheduling. I already called the school about that field trip thing. I already let Brian's advisor know. Every single time, the sentence was technically good news. Something had needed doing and it had been done. That was the genius of it. The phrase was always accompanied by a solved problem, which meant that questioning it felt not just ungrateful but slightly irrational. What exactly are you complaining about? Things got handled. The first time I noticed something off, I wouldn't have called it a problem. I wouldn't have called it anything at all. It was more like a small wrongness I couldn't name while it was happening. We were doing school registration for Cadden's 3rd grade year, the summer before last, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with the paper forms, and I got to the emergency contact page, and it was already filled out. Connie's name, Connie's number, relationship listed as grandmother/household caregiver. I hadn't done that. I had filled out the same section the year before myself, and I had put my mother first, Brian second, Connie third. I sat looking at the form for a full minute. I thought about how many forms we'd had on the counter, how many times Connie had been here while I was on shift, how entirely possible it was that she had seen an upcoming deadline and filled in what she knew in an effort to be helpful. I initialed the form. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't say anything to Brian. That was the aperture, not the form itself, the decision to not make a thing of the form. 6 months after that, I called Dr. Hartley's office to reschedule Myra's cleaning, and the woman on the phone said, "Oh, we're showing that Connie Collins is the primary contact for your kids' files. Did you want to update that?" I said yes. I said it pleasantly. I took down the confirmation number for the update, and I hung up and I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for about 10 minutes not moving. When I mentioned it to Brian that evening, he said she'd probably just given them her number because she's the one who takes them to most of the appointments, and it's more convenient. He said this with the complete reasonableness of a man who has never once felt inconvenienced by someone else managing his life for him. I said I thought I should be the contact at my own children's dentist. He said, "You're right, yeah, for sure. I'll mention it to her." He did not mention it. 2 weeks passed, and I didn't follow up because I knew that if I followed up, it would sound like I was tracking something. And in our family, the person who sounds like they're tracking something ends up being the one who has to explain themselves. 2 months later, I was on hold with our car insurance company about a billing discrepancy, and the representative, while pulling up the account, mentioned that a household driver had been added the previous month. I asked who. She said Carol Collins, age 64. I told her I hadn't authorized the addition and asked her to walk me through removing it. She did. I thanked her. I ended the call and I opened a new note on my phone and I wrote down the date and what I'd been told and what I'd done about it. Connie, short for Constance. Not Carol, close enough that it had gone through. When I brought it up to Brian, he said his mother had asked about borrowing the car for a trip to see her sister in Dayton, and he'd said it would be easier if she was just listed on the policy. I asked if he understood what being listed on a household policy actually meant, what it implied about residency and primary use. He said he figured it was probably similar to what she already had. I looked at him across the kitchen and I thought, he genuinely does not see it. He is not covering for her. He just has never once had to think about the administrative architecture of his own life, because someone has always been managing it, first her, and now, in a different way, also her. I kept adding to the note on my phone. A nurse documents. It's not suspicious, it's just how you're trained to think when you work in an environment where details matter and memories are imperfect, and the difference between what happened and what you remember happening can have real consequences. You write down what you observed when you observed it, who said what. You don't editorialize in the notes. You don't diagnose, you record. Then the financial advisor. Brian's company has a benefits package that includes access to a financial planning service, and about a year into our marriage, we'd set up a joint account through them and met with an advisor named Dennis twice a year. I'd liked Dennis. He was thorough and unglamorous in a way I appreciated. I found out about Connie's involvement there not from Brian, not from Connie, but from Dennis himself. He called me on a Thursday in the spring to go over our Q2 summary, and in the middle of the call, he referenced a conversation he'd had with Connie about our investment timeline, and I said, "I'm sorry." He said they'd been looping her in for about 8 months because she was responsive and seemed to have context, and Brian had mentioned she was involved in the household. I said, "She is not a party to our finances, Dennis." He went quiet for a second and then said, "Stephanie, I apologize. I should have confirmed that with you directly. I'll remove her from the communication chain today." And then, almost under his breath, almost to himself, he said one more word. He said systematic, and then he seemed to wish he hadn't said it out loud. I let it pass. I had a list to finish and calls to make, and I told myself it was just a word a cautious man had reached for. But I didn't delete it from my memory. It sat there. That night I made a second list. Not dates and details, that list already existed. This second list was categories: medical contacts, school contacts, insurance, financial communications. I looked at the 4 categories and I thought about what it would mean, functionally, if you were the primary contact across all of them. What that would mean about who the institutions understood as the decision-maker for this family. What that would mean about who got called first when something happened. About who held the paper trail. I thought about the school registration form that had come back, already filled in. And I thought, if that pattern extends to enrollment forms, if she has been doing what she does everywhere else with a document that carries legal weight. That was when I started going through every single paper in every drawer. The school packet for Mara's 2nd grade enrollment was sitting on the counter waiting for me to finish and return it. I sat down with it on a Sunday afternoon, and I went through it page by page, not section by section, page by page. At the back, attached with a single staple that I'd apparently handled without noticing the first time I'd flipped through it, was a document I didn't recognize. Different weight paper. Official formatting. A notary seal in the lower right corner. The ink slightly raised the way notary seals are. At the top, caregiver's authorization affidavit. Below that, in plain bureaucratic language, this document confers day-to-day decision-making authority over the named minor children upon the named caregiver in matters including, but not limited to, educational decisions, routine medical decisions, and emergency consent in the absence of a parent or legal guardian. Named caregiver, Constance Ruth Collins. Named minor children, Caden James Collins and Mara Grace Collins. I set the document down flat on the table. I am trained to stay calm in emergencies. I have held the hands of women whose monitors were going in the wrong direction and kept my voice even because someone in that room needed to be even, and I have been that person reliably for 11 years. But standing in my own kitchen, holding a notarized document that assigned legal authority over my children to a woman who had not told me it existed, I felt the specific physical sensation of a room revealing itself to have always been a different room than the one you thought you were standing in. The form was notarized. It was signed by Connie. It was not signed by me. It was not signed by Brian. The date on the notary stamp was 9 months prior. 9 months. I thought about every Tuesday and Thursday pickup in those 9 months. Every time I'd said, "Can you grab them this week?" Every time she'd been the adult in charge in a school building or a waiting room or a situation I didn't know about, with a document I'd never seen giving her authority I'd never agreed to. I felt every rationalization I'd made over the past 2 years restructure itself. The school form already filled out, the dentist contact, the insurance listing, the financial advisor who'd been looping her in for 8 months. None of those had been careless helpfulness. Every single one had been load-bearing. Every single one had added a stone to a foundation I hadn't known was being built until the moment I was standing on it. And Dennis's word came back. Systematic, that was the accurate word. I called the school's administrative office from the kitchen table. The woman confirmed the document was in both children's files. I asked whether a parent had been notified when it was filed. She said they'd received it from the grandmother and added it as standard third-party caregiver documentation. I asked whether a parental co-signature was required. There was a pause. She said she'd need to check with the district's legal liaison. I told her I'd be calling the liaison directly, hung up, and called the liaison before she had time to loop them in. I took notes. I asked specific questions about revocation procedure. I got names and direct numbers. Then I called Brian. He answered on the first ring, which meant he wasn't in a meeting, which meant this conversation was going to happen right now. I told him what I had found. I read him the relevant section verbatim. He was quiet for a long time. Then, she mentioned something about that, I think, a while back. I said that was fine. I asked him if he had read the document, another silence. He said he thought it was just something for school, like for pickup authorization. I said, Brian, it has a notary seal. It has the word authority in it twice. Did you read it? The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. It was the silence of a man who understood completely, in that moment, that he had not read it and that the world had continued on while he wasn't reading it, and that the world had not, in fact, been fine. I drove to Connie's house that night. Brian offered to come. I told him to stay with the kids, and I said it in a way that was not a suggestion. She answered the door in a cardigan, cup of tea in hand, and the first thing she said before I said anything, before I'd even fully stepped through the door, was, I was wondering when you'd get around to that. Not flustered. Not caught. She had been expecting me long enough to have prepared an opening line, and she'd chosen one that reframed my presence at her door as my tardiness rather than her wrongdoing. I clocked it. I did not react to it. I asked her to sit down. We sat across from each other at her kitchen table. I set my phone on the table between us with the notes document open because I'd decided in the car that I was going to document this conversation too. She looked at the phone. She looked at me. She did not look surprised. I said, you filed a legal authorization document for my children without telling me. She said, it's not a guardianship. It's an authorization affidavit. There's a real legal difference, and I'd encourage you to look into that before you decide what it means. I said, walk me through why you didn't tell me. She set her tea down, folded her hands on the table. She said, Stephanie, I want you to genuinely think about what it would look like if something happened when I was with those kids, and I had no standing to make a decision. I've been in situations at schools and at doctors' offices where people look at me, and they're not sure what my role is. I've had nurses, and I say this with all due respect for your profession, I've had nurses look at me like I need to prove myself before they'll give me any information about my own grandchildren. This document protects them. That is the only reason it exists. I noticed what she'd done with the word nurses. I filed it. I kept my voice level. I said, you made that decision 9 months ago and chose not to mention it to either of their parents. She said, I told Brian, quietly, flatly. I said, you told him it was a school form. She held my gaze. I told him what it was in terms he was able to understand at the time. He's a busy man. You both are. I said, you're describing my husband as someone who needed to be managed around rather than informed. Something shifted in her face, not guilt, not quite, more like a recalculation. She picked up her tea. She said, you know, I have watched you, and I say this with love, Stephanie. I have only ever said this with love. I have watched you run yourself into the ground for years. The double shifts. Coming home at 10 o'clock at night. I have picked those children up from school on days when I genuinely was not certain you had remembered they needed to be picked up. I have put food in that refrigerator because I didn't know if there would be any otherwise. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was quieter, more careful, the way a person speaks when they've been holding something for a long time and have finally decided to set it down. If you had wanted to be the one handling all of this, any of this, you could have been. I just filled in where I was needed. She said it gently. She said it with something that looked almost like sorrow in it, the way you are sorrowful about a fact that is simply true and not your fault. And I want to be honest with you. I have promised myself I would be honest in telling this story. That line reached into the exact place she knew it would reach. For a stretch of seconds that felt much longer than seconds, The old reflex fired. I thought about every double shift. About eating dinner standing over the sink at 10 at night because there wasn't time to sit down. About the Tuesday I was so exhausted leaving the hospital that I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself drive. And Connie had the kids, and the world had kept running because she was there to run it. She had been watching me for years, and she had found every place I already blamed myself, and she had walked through those doors like they'd been left open for her. Which I realized sitting there, they had been. I watched her watch me almost fold. And then something settled. The same thing that settles in a delivery room when the numbers are wrong and someone in that room needs to be the one who doesn't panic. I let the seconds pass. I set my hands flat on the table. I said, I understand what you're doing right now, and I need you to understand that it isn't going to work. I kept my voice level, not cold level. I said, we will be filing the revocation with the district by end of week. I've already spoken with the legal liaison. I'm asking you to return your key to the house by Friday. And going forward, any arrangement involving the children will be discussed with both of us present, confirmed by me in writing, and agreed to before it happens, not after. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, and what do I tell Cadden and Mara when they ask why Grandma isn't picking them up anymore? I said, you tell them we're making some new arrangements. You say it warmly, and you don't make it anyone's fault. That is the one thing I'm genuinely asking you to do well, and I believe you can do it. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded, slowly, in the specific way someone nods when they are accepting a temporary setback rather than a permanent conclusion. And she said, I hope you'll keep the children's needs front and center through all of this. I said I would. I stood up. I left. Brian was at the kitchen table when I got home. He'd printed the affidavit and was reading it, actually reading it, line by line, and he looked like a man who had been sitting in one place for a long time with thoughts that were not comfortable. He said I should have read it. I said I knew. He said I should have told you whatever she mentioned. I said I knew that too. We sat in the quiet of the kitchen for a while, and then he said, I'm going to talk to my manager about the regional assignment. I've been thinking about it for months, and I haven't said it to you, and I'm saying it now. I didn't make it easy or hard. I didn't thank him or challenge him. I just waited to see if it was a thing he'd actually do. He did it. He took a regional role in March. It cut his overnight travel to 1 week a month. He took a salary cut to do it. That is different from a man who says the right things in a kitchen at midnight and then gets on a plane Monday morning. The revocation was filed in writing through the district's legal office. The district revised their intake protocol to require a parent or legal guardian co-signature on any third-party caregiver authorization form. The principal told me, about 2 months later with the specific weariness of someone who'd had a difficult few weeks, that they'd found 3 other similar filings from other families in the same audit. The pediatrician's contact was corrected. The car insurance had already been corrected. The financial advisor removed Connie from all communications and added a secondary verification step for any non-account holder contact. The dentist needed a single phone call. 6 weeks to untangle what had taken years to build, one institution at a time. Connie has a different relationship with the kids now. Brian manages the visits. She doesn't have a key. She hasn't, to my knowledge, filed anything or listed herself anywhere without asking. Whether that is genuine remorse or recalibration to a new set of constraints, I genuinely cannot tell you. I've stopped trying to read her because I've learned that reading her is exactly what she's best at allowing. The version that matters is the practical one. The documents are changed, the contacts are corrected, and I know what's in every drawer. There used to be a manila folder in my kitchen. I shredded the original. I have a scanned copy in a folder on my phone, labeled with the date, because I'm a nurse and I document. Because someday I might need to remember exactly how a piece of paper can look completely ordinary, plain cardstock, standard staple, bureaucratic font, while it is quietly rearranging the architecture of your life. The most helpful person in the room is not always on your side. Sometimes helpful is just the longest distance between where you are and where someone else wants you to be. And the particular cruelty of weaponized helpfulness is that by the time you can see it clearly, you've already been grateful for it. You've already said thank you. You've already opened the door and handed over the key. Read the form, every single page.